a request by a number of participants that, because Rabbi Krish did want to continue on yesterday's topic because he only covered like half, and so today's lecture will be a continuation on medical ethics. Please welcome Rabbi Krish.
Hi everybody. Hello. Thank you, Rabbi. Remember our menu? Who was here yesterday? Yeah, a lot of you. Those of you who were not here yesterday, I think you missed a good time. You didn't miss anything you'll need for today. What we were doing yesterday, we started doing yesterday with God's help. L'chaim, of course. What we started doing yesterday with God's help was we were going through, I'm coming back, don't worry. I'm coming back. What we started doing yesterday is going through a survey of medical ideas and explaining what the Torah has to say about them. And we discussed how this is how we are revealing the will and wisdom of God Almighty in the physical world. We talked a little bit about the fact that when we take these modern inventions or modern problems or modern medical bits of ideas, ethics, procedures, and we read God's will into them, we're creating a dwelling place for God in this world. Dira b'tachtenim. And that's why we were born in the first place, why God hung rings on Saturn and created an ever-expanding universe. The entire physical world exists for us to do this. And I guess that was important enough to you because we're doing it again. So what we are now doing is we're going to continue this particular topic through continuing our medical survey with new topics. What we had yesterday, I have our menu up here. I'll make it big. Hang on. Let me make it big. Slideshow. Boom. Very professional. Yesterday, we did medical authority and we decided that when a person's sick, they should go to their doctor. We talked about organ donation and we decided that people are free to, although not obligated, to give up their innards in some cases. We talked about abortions, and believe it or not, we didn't say yes or no, we said ask your rabbi, which I think is pretty cutting edge, pretty groundbreaking. We talked about euthanasia, which is about ending people's lives, and I think that's where we ended last time, end-of-life care, and specifically physician-assisted suicide, which I hear now is like legal here, right? This state? All right, we talked about it. If you'd like to hear more about it, it's available on the YouTube channel. There's a whole, what's your website again? It's
jml.org.au.
jml.org.au.
With a link to the
YouTube page. Yeah, so if you'd like to see what happened last time, it's all available online with incredible production value. Thank you very much, Mr. Producer. Now, yeah, why not? Go ahead. Okay, today on our list, we're going to cover mental health, which I know is a big one, alternative medicine, also a big one, childbirth and infertility, and drug use and abuse. Pretty heavy-hitting topics. I think we will get through them with God's help. And then the plan, I believe, for tomorrow, unless I'm forgetting our schedule, I think we're doing more of this tomorrow, believe it or not, because tomorrow we're doing DNA and biotech. So it's going to be medically heavy the next 48 hours. DNA and biotech will include a discussion of when we use DNA as evidence, how we can use genetics, designer babies we're going to talk about. Can we design, we can test tube babies and designer babies. We're going to do lab-grown meat because it's a kind of biotech. So all that sort of stuff, that's for tomorrow. Without further ado, let's get into mental health. I have to go all the way forward. See, we did all this. You guys remember the earrings? Remember the earrings? Yeah, that was where this is. All right. Remember the earrings. It's like we've been through something together, right? Okay, mental health. Here we go, mental health. The first thing I'd like to establish, because I actually always kind of wondered about this. When I say always, I mean I started looking into these things very seriously maybe about 10 years ago. And prior to that, I did always wonder about this. I always wondered, do mental health professionals have the halachic status of doctors? We give doctors a very high level in Jewish law. Doctors are the shluchim for God. They're God's messengers for sending a cure into the world. Now, obviously, that applies if I go to my doctor and I tell him I'm not feeling well, and I trust God from beginning to end. God sends a cure through my doctor. Will God do that through my therapist, my psychologist, my psychiatrists are doctors? Will God do that through my mental health professional? I think we have some people in the room who are mental health professionals. You want to out yourselves? Or you don't want to do it until you find out what I have to say about you? Okay, so after this slide, you'll tell it's going to be good. My mother has a PhD in psychology, so I come from a mental health professional. My father's a urologist. That doesn't do not a lot of neuro and euro, but but my mother's has a PhD in psychology, so I do come from a mental health professional. And the Rebbe says, here I have a letter from the Rebbe. Where the Rebbe says that somebody should try to find out in a diplomatic manner whether a psychiatric specialist was visited, what was said, and whether his instructions are being followed. The Rebbe says, certainly there are eminent specialists in this field in your locale, and it's worth making an effort that the advice of one of them is sought. The reason why I'm bringing this letter with this tone is because it's representative of many other letters that share this tone, that when someone has a mental health concern, the Rebbe instructs them to go to a mental health professional using almost the exact same words and level of insistence that he does when he asks people who are sick with their bodies to go to a body health professional. To put that in slightly different words, it is my understanding from the Rebbe's work that if a person is mentally unwell and they go to a mental health professional, that person has the status of a doctor insofar as they will become a shliach for God's blessing to bring a cure. Which means we are as concerned about physical health as mental health. In some cases, I think it makes a lot more sense to be more concerned about mental health. There are certain unfortunate mental health conditions that have higher death rates than certain physical health conditions. So this is not a laughing matter, although we will laugh about it in other ways. This particular moment of it is not a laughing matter. That's not a joke. Mental health is very serious, and we see mental health professionals as having the status of doctors in that if you go to one and trust in God, the cure will come through them. Which means we do go to mental health professionals. The Rebbe says in many cases, I want to know if somebody in mental health was consulted. Not a regular doctor, a mental health professional doctor. So now that I've revealed this, do we have mental health professionals in the room? Still none. Okay, fine.
They're working.
They're working, right? They're busy. It's today Monday? It's the middle of the day. It's a public holiday. It's not a public holiday. I don't know. I'm taking my cues from you. Okay. Obviously that means that if someone is not mentally well, we don't really have advice for them in Chassidus, right? I mean, you'd have to say this. Because if somebody, we talked about this a little bit earlier, if somebody has cancer, Rahman al-Islam should happen to nobody, but if somebody, back when people used to get sick before Mashiach came, when somebody has cancer, you don't open Tanya and say, what does Tanya say is the best chemotherapy? You don't open a mimer to learn your way out of a problem. What you do is you go to a doctor and trust that God will send a cure through the doctor. If we are seeing mental health professionals as being the same as physical health professionals, and mental disease as being the same as physical disease, then it makes sense that we can't cure major depressive disorder using happy chapters of Tanya. That's for people who are subclinically sad, not people who have major depressive disorder. I think this is simple. Which means that the Rebbe doesn't necessarily have advice for how to cure mental health challenges, because the Rebbe's advice is going to be, go to your doctor and God sends a cure through them. The Rebbe is going to have the exact same amount of advice for someone who has cancer than he will for someone who has major depressive disorder or clinical anxiety. The Rebbe has a lot of advice for a sad person becoming happy, but not for a sick person becoming healthy. His advice for the sick people is to trust in God, go to the doctor, and serve God with as much joy as a person possibly can. That's the Rebbe's go-to advice for the sick. Give a lot of tzedakah, check your mezuzahs, not medical interventions. People do not understand that at all. And because people don't understand that at all, and people also historically did not understand that at all, we have a number of people who wrote letters to the Rebbe asking him to propose psychiatric interventions or psychological interventions. And the Rebbe again and again pushes back and says, that's not what I'm going to do. However, he also kind of does it. I want to show you one example of where the Rebbe says he's not going to do it, but then does it. I think this is my translation. I think. I sometimes forget if I borrowed. I think I translated this one. But if I didn't, I apologize to whoever did. Regarding the original Hebrew is on the side. The Rebbe says, regarding your request for advice, considering your profession, it is essential to acknowledge the wisdom gained from direct experience. Providing counsel from a distance is challenging, given the influence of factors such as country, conditions, family dynamics. Those in close observation are better equipped to devise effective therapeutic approaches. Let me tell you what the Rebbe just said. Don't worry, I know I read it fast, but I also know that you all speak English, so you'll be fine. It's on the screen. Me, it's on the screen, you can read it. I just was getting through it quickly so I could talk around it. A psychiatrist or psychologist, I can't remember which, mental health professional, writes to the Rebbe and says, do you have any mental health advice for therapists? How would you propose we do therapy? And the Rebbe says back, what do you mean? How would I know how to do therapy? I'm a Rebbe. Meaning it's not that the Rebbe doesn't know how. The mysteries of God are given to those who fear God. But the Rebbe understands that his role is not to prescribe medications. His role is to remind people to go to a doctor with faith. So the Rebbe begins this letter by saying, you're asking the wrong person. If somebody is mentally not well, the same as if somebody's physically not well, they go to a professional, trust in God, God sends the cure through them, and you don't go to your rabbi about this. You go to your rabbi to ask how to go to the doctor. A rabbi's job is to tell people go to the doctor with faith. A rabbi's job isn't to prescribe or to come up with new modalities for treating mental health issues. And then the Rebbe says, nevertheless, I'm going to do it anyway. Nevertheless, since you've reached out to me, I'm acknowledging divine providence in all matters. I wish to highlight a method I've seen yield positive results in similar circumstances. So the Rebbe says, although that's true, that in theory you don't go to your rabbi and you don't even go to the Rebbe for a medical question. You go to the Rebbe for a blessing and you go to a doctor for medical advice. The Rebbe is saying, since you asked me, this is Vashgacha Pratis, God runs the entire universe, divine providence rules all. You wouldn't ask me if God himself didn't want me to opine, and therefore I shall opine. And the Rebbe's opinion means something. The Rebbe's opinion is, a method I've seen yield positive results in similar circumstances, Hesach Hadas. I'm pointing this out because the Rebbe uses the phrase Hesach Hadas in literally more than 100 letters. It's one of the Rebbe's, he returns to it again and again and again as part and parcel of a treatment for just about every mental health issue and for regular subclinical mental challenges. People spend a lot too much time thinking about the problem in front of them. And stopping to think about the issue and not just emptying the brain of the problem, but replacing it with something positive is a very effective therapeutic tool. And when the Rebbe wrote these letters, I don't know how well acknowledged that was, but right now there's a whole movement in mental health pushing this basic idea. Which again shows that the Rebbe is on cutting edge and ahead of the time, which I don't think I need to explain to the room. But this method of Hesach Hadas, the Rebbe advises again and again in conjunction with therapy. So for example, there's a letter, I don't think I have it for today, but it's a very famous letter to somebody who had obsessive compulsive disorder, clinical OCD, not, am I blocking things? What? Am I in the way? Is it?
In a way.
That's possible. I might have pasted wrong. That's possible. Yeah, no, it would not be the first time I messed up a slide. I acknowledge. I'll take a look in a second. Not first or the last. Keep an eye out. I like that. You notice that. I might have put the wrong Hebrew letter on the slide. Wow. Okay. Sorry. Whatever. This one's real. It's a real letter. In any event, in this famous OCD letter, somebody with clinical OCD, the Rebbe says, I want you to see a therapist. Obviously, I want you to see a therapist. Why? Because the keli for blessing, the vessel for blessing, will come through going to a medical professional. And I want you to practice Hesach Hadas. Practice when you want to do something, removing it from your mind and replacing it with something else. Practice the process of not thinking about the problem and instead replacing it with a piece of Torah or a positive thought. Now, that does not mean that these things are to the exclusion of one another. They're part and parcel. But the Rebbe's go-to advice for somebody who has any sort of mental health challenge is, I want you seeing a therapist, I want you talking to a doctor because I want the blessing to come through the physical world, and I'd like you to try Hesach Hadas. Once again, Hesach Hadas defined by the Rebbe as not thinking about the issue at hand and replacing it with a positive thought. An empty mind is a very dangerous thing. Making the thought go out of your mind is not what you want to do. You want to replace it with a good one. So a person has an unhealthy thought. They stop thinking about it. How do you stop thinking about it? You tell somebody not to think about something, it's all they think about, right? Says the Rebbe, I'm not telling you stop thinking about it, I'm telling you think about something else. Fill your mind with something that is so overwhelming to think about, you don't have room for the bad thought. In conjunction with seeing a therapist and regular medical interventions. That's very, very important to stress. Oh. Here's a controversial one. I know, right? Rabbi didn't approve my slides ahead of time. If he had, he might have noticed that I had the wrong one a second ago. I'm bringing this letter to light, even though it's been circulated lately, but I don't know if it's published in any books. It's been circulated for a little while. It's surprising to me that in the year 1985, I didn't know that we had interventions for gender dysphoria in 1985, but apparently we did. It goes back further than I thought, huh? No, as a disease. I didn't know we had interventions. The implication of this letter is that there was some sort of surgical intervention already. I didn't know that we had surgical interventions in the 80s. And certainly I don't think we were doing hormone treatment. No, it's in the DSM going back, sure. I don't think we could do anything about it. Anyway, that's not for now. That's not the point. Point is, I'm bringing you this letter as an example of how the Rebbe approaches a very serious mental health condition that is classified in the DSM as a mental health condition, because from it you can get advice for how to view a lot of other similar issues. So I'm using this letter as a standout example of the Rebbe encountering a mental health condition, talking around the medical establishment, and also, in addition to seeking the help a person needs, giving a Torah perspective to show you how these two things might interact with each other, how Hesach Hadas might play out in real time. This is my last slide for mental health, and we're going to move on to a different topic, but I want to bring this to the fore because it's so interesting. For those who don't know what gender dysphoria is, the picture maybe perhaps illustrates it a little bit. Gender dysphoria is the recognized mental health condition where someone believes that they are not in the correct body. A man believes that they're in a woman's body, a woman believes that they're in a man's body. That's gender dysphoria. As you might know, in our society at large, this has been depathologized, but it has not been medically depathologized. It is still in the DSM as far as I know, yes? Still, I don't think I believe in the updated DSM, they didn't remove it. And as a matter of fact, in America at least, the DSM is our manual for what is a mental health condition. And just to get a little political for a moment, not in a negative way, just to talk politics Americanly, in America, if we don't have something in the DSM, we're not allowed to treat it, which means that if you don't pathologize certain conditions, you can't use medical interventions for them.
Homosexualism was removed.
It was, and therefore we can't treat it, which is what they wanted. But I don't believe this was removed. And if they had removed it, they wouldn't be able to treat it. So gender-affirming surgery, which is what it's called in America, wouldn't be possible as far as I know if we didn't have a DSM diagnosis. So a lot of times things are put in the DSM specifically to allow medical intervention. This isn't really necessary for our discussion, but just a little fun to talk about. In America, we used to have, probably in the world at large, we had something called Asperger's until recently. Have you heard of Asperger's? Nowadays we call it part of autism spectrum disorder. We used to call it Asperger's. The reason why we changed it was because until we made it an official diagnosis under autism, in America at least, we couldn't get the funding we needed to help people with Asperger's. Because it needed to be an actual DSM condition under the major disorders. So by taking Asperger's and promoting it to autism, you offended a bunch of parents who didn't want their kids to have Asperger's, but simultaneously gave them millions of dollars in funding for their schools. So there's a reason why we put the DSM as sort of our vehicle in America, at least, for treating mental health conditions. So, just a side point, that's why we put things in the DSM, in case you were curious. Okay. Somebody writes to the Rebbe in the 80s saying that they have what is classified right now as a mental health disorder. That is, that they believe that they are in the wrong body and would like to take steps to make sure that they are gender affirming for their own mental health. I want to read the Rebbe's answer to you and then I might talk about it for a second. The Rebbe says, as you acknowledge, there are distinct mitzvahs for Jewish males and females. Tefillin, Shabbos candles. Yes, you have more, but that's a good example. With significant implications for observance. No tefillin, usually no Shabbos candles. Yes? Okay. Given this, it's unclear why you'd contemplate interfering with Hashem's design for a change of sex, which would undoubtedly complicate matters regarding Torah and mitzvahs. The desire you express to have been born a different gender stems from human inability to comprehend Hashem's ways. If this desire troubles you, consulting with a Torah-observant psychologist is advisable. Additionally, I recommend having your tefillin checked for kosher status, which does give you an idea which direction we're talking about. But in any event, just in case you're looking for clues, I want to pull from this how we talk about people with mental health struggles. Because this is a very instructive letter that I think has very little to do with gender dysphoria. I think gender dysphoria just happens to be the thing that grabs your eye on the screen. This letter is not just about gender dysphoria. This is how we address people who are having mental health challenges. I'm going to go out of order. But number one, if it's a problem, I want you seeing a psychologist. If a person's having a problem that's interfering with their quality of life, they should be seeking out professional help. We don't tell them, open a Tanya, you'll be okay. We tell them, I want you seeing a psychologist. That's where the Keli for Bracha comes from. That's point number one, although it's the last one letter. Point number one.
Doctors aren't allowed to advise people.
I don't know about your country. In my country, they are. Come to America. We'll have to talk about this after if you don't mind. I'm going to stay with the letter. So number one, we tell people to seek out professional help. Number two, the Rebbe here, maybe I misread the letter. Help me. I don't see anywhere the Rebbe saying, you're gross, you're disgusting, you're wrong. I don't see it. I don't see the Rebbe laughing. Although, I love laughing. We're going to tell a lot of jokes. We're just not right now. I don't see the Rebbe laughing. I don't see the Rebbe pointing out something disgusting. I don't see the Rebbe expressing anything but concern for a Jew who might be struggling in an area of Torah and mitzvahs, which is our shita. That's our shita. That's the way we encounter someone who has a Yetzer Hara. Whether it's a weird one or a non-weird one, we start by saying, let's stay focused here. Who cares how the Yetzer Hara shows up? Who cares that the manifestation is one that is societally acceptable or unacceptable? At the end of the day, a Jew's job is to live as a Jew. Any urge I have that gets in the way of me living as an effective Jew is toxic for me. Let's not talk about the issue at hand. Let's talk about the soul at hand. It's not good for a Jew to have this problem because it complicates their Torah and mitzvahs. The Rebbe's not saying this isn't good because it's gross. The Rebbe isn't saying this isn't good because it's usher. The Rebbe isn't even calling it forbidden, although in many cases it could be, especially when it gets to dinum having to do with cross-dressing. The Rebbe's not going into that. The Rebbe's saying here, anything that complicates my life in Torah and mitzvahs is not for me. That's a powerful approach. It's how you talk to someone, God forbid, who's interested in marrying someone who's not Jewish. A Jew is interested in marrying a non-Jew. I think the right approach is not, this is disgusting. Because, by the way, it's not. God made humans, and humans are beautiful. They just don't belong together, these particular humans. Right? The approach isn't, I'm disgusted. The approach isn't, this is wrong. The approach is, this is not for you. You're a Jew. Anything that complicates your life as a Jew is off the table. I'm not saying you're not in love. I'm not saying you're not dysphoric. I'm not saying you don't have an urge. I'm acknowledging your urge and telling you it's from the Yetzer Hara, it's getting in your way, don't let it win. It's a completely different shita on how to handle challenges, not just mental health challenges. It's pointing out the fact that what matters to a Jew is doing the right thing. It's acknowledging. You notice the acknowledgement here? The Rebbe never says here, no, you don't. Right? This person says, this is a male who thinks he's a female, right? A male who says, I'm trapped in a male body, but I'm really a female. Feels female. The Rebbe never says he's wrong. He says, this desire that you express, which you really feel, stems from the human inability to comprehend Hashem's ways. He's not saying you're not feeling it. He's saying, beat it, defeat it, talk to a doctor, get better. Fight your Yetzer Hara. This is the way that a person speaks compassionately about other people's challenges.
It's a real case of hermaphrodite, so it won't be both.
We can always talk about intersex some other time. That's because it's very rare. You know, people always bring, I know you're not bringing it up for that reason. I want to respond to you because I want you to be able to respond to them. Whenever anybody brings up intersex issues, which is an actual biological thing, it's worth noting that this is like 1 in several million. It's incredibly rare. So for us to make any sort of broad legislation or broad claims about something so rare doesn't make any sense. It's case by case, right? So on case by case basis, there's what to talk about. It's so rare, people shouldn't be allowed to confuse you with it, right? Yeah, call people out when they do that. It's not, this is never an intersex issue. Yes, sure.
So I know that Rabbi Shearson spoke about the increasing feminine side of the world in our time. So I'm just wondering, did he ever talk to individuals about that?
The question was, does this have anything to do, this is the only one I'm going to take in the middle of the lecture. After that, we'll do the questions only after. But let me just, the question was, does the Rebbe ever talk about the fact that as Mashiach is coming closer, we're seeing an increase in feminine, and that might be on, I guess, the negative side influencing this? As far as I know, he did not. But I will say that having the strengths of the feminine does not obligate a person to violate Jewish law or to dress like the feminine if they're not feminine. Meaning, there's incredible value to feminine power. There are so many things that the feminine side of Seder Yishtalshelus, of Kabbalah, of practical women doing practical things that men would really benefit from implementing, but they don't have to wear a skirt to do it. So no, and I mean this very literally. Men have a ton to learn from women as men. And so as we get closer to a time where the womanly attributes are becoming more important, and as Mashiach comes, Malchus rises, there absolutely is that idea, the power of women, and that men should be implementing that on some way. They implement that within the realm of Shulchan Aruch. Any attempted implementation outside the realm of the Code of Jewish Law is toxic to the soul. So no, absolutely as a value, but certainly not as a implementation that, God forbid, could violate Jewish law. Anyway, I like this letter so much because I think it shows a lot of compassion. I think this is how we have to talk about these issues when they come up. It certainly is the way that I talk about them. Okay. Alternative medicine. We did a little bit of this earlier today. We stepped our toes in alternative medicine today. I want to talk about the Torah perspective on alternative medicine for a moment. In order to do that, I've realized, having given this lecture a few times, not everybody knows what alternative medicine is. What counts as alternative versus, conventional, Western, allopathic. So I put some examples up on the screen. These are what alternative medicine professionals traditionally call alternative medicine. Why not ask people what they think about themselves, right? So there's a couple different categories. I'm not going to read through them to you, but this is what we're talking about when we're talking about alternative medicine. There are traditional forms that include things like acupuncture and homeopathy. You have body therapies, chiropractic, for example, osteopathic medicine, which is a regularly practiced form of medicine in the West, but certainly is considered alternative. Supplements, herbal medicine, diets. You have mind therapies like meditation, which we talked about today. Sense-related therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, music therapy. These are all forms of alternative medicine, and some are great and some are not. And it's not really just one package. People who say they like or don't like alternative medicine aren't really saying anything. There's kinds of alternative medicine, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the Torah perspective on alternative medicine. I got to make a couple points about Jewish law and medical practice in general. When you know these general points, I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you a flowchart, a simple flowchart. 3 questions a person needs to ask their rabbi and their doctor before trying any form of alternative medicine. If the answers are affirmative to all 3, it is permitted according to Jewish law, and the question is really just one of personal choice now. If the answer is no to any of those 3, it ends up being forbidden, and even if I want to do something forbidden very badly, I can't because I'm a Jew, and that's not good for me. So I'm going to show you the track, but I want to build the case. I want to show you the primary sources a little bit. We're doing a little bit more text than we usually do, but I wanted to have a good time. Number 1, it is noteworthy that according to the Code of Jewish Law, that's Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 6:18, what the majority of physicians think in any given time is considered authoritative to some degree. That means there is a power to what the majority is up to. There really is. There is a halachically recognized power to what the majority of physicians say. What if my physician is corrupt? Who cares? You're a Jew. You follow the will of God. You don't have to worry about other people hurting you. No one can hurt you. God protects. What if my physician is wrong? Same answer. What the majority of physicians think, whether right or wrong, is enshrined in Jewish law as giving you a certain degree of protection, which means that if a person follows what the majority of physicians says, God will send a cure for them regardless of whether those physicians are right. So there's a special protection toward going with the majority, even if the majority is dead wrong, even if the majority is corrupt, because God protects the majority. This is a principle that's enshrined in the Code of Jewish Law, but it's also a principle that echoes throughout the entire course of Jewish law, known as Shema P'sayim, which is that God protects simpletons. God protects what the average person does. So that means that a person doesn't really have to do a whole lot of research. They can be confident following the medical advice of the medical establishment, even if they're wrong, even if they're corrupt. And I, by the way, don't think that they're, generally speaking, corrupt. I work with a lot of doctors. I respect the people I work with. But I do recognize that in any group of people, you have good ones and bad ones. If you're worried about the bad ones, don't be. The majority does protect you. However, a Jew is not obligated to follow the majority medical opinion. There are other ways to be a Jew. And here's the other ways to be a Jew. If you want to do something that's not what the majority of physicians is interested in, then you do have to make sure, first of all, it doesn't have idolatry or witchcraft in it. I'll tell you why this is so important. In the West, we don't have this problem. Are you even in the West? I know you're Western, but I know you're Western, but I don't know if you're in the West. Yeah, you're Western, but I think geographically you're in the South. Like, aren't you in Antarctica, kind of? You have penguins. You're not in the West. Whatever, you're Western. In Western medicine,
We're in the Middle East.
you're in the Middle East. My heart's in the Middle East, and by that I mean Melbourne. So, in Western medicine has its strength and has its weaknesses. I'm aware of both. I work in both. Trust me. We have our strengths and weaknesses. One of our strengths in Western medicine is that we really don't take much at all from idolatry and witchcraft. It's just not where Western medicine comes from. It comes from chemicals, and it comes from ideas, and it comes from laboratories, but it doesn't come from witchcraft and idolatry. Eastern medicine very frequently does. Which means that if somebody wants to try something alternative that is not conventional allopathic Western medicine, the first question they must ask through a competent authority is, will I accidentally worship an idol or do witchcraft? That would be real bad, and it's not entirely off the table. In our talk earlier today, we noted that there are certain forms of yoga that has not been looked over by a rabbi and sanitized, has literal acts of idolatry in it. Regular yoga is a kind of idolatry. So things that you think are completely kosher aren't always, and if you want to try an alternative method of medicine, especially if it originates in the East, you got to make sure that it's kosher. It's easy enough to find out if something's kosher, but you have to find out if something's kosher. The same way we talked about earlier, you wouldn't eat a food without making sure it has kosher certification. We don't do medical practices without making sure they're free of idolatry. So step one, we need to ask ourselves, is there idolatry here? The Aruch HaShulchan, and I collect my students right now. I have some of my former students in the room. Current students. Your students are your students forever. Might remember this. I collect famous Yechiels because there's only like 4 of us. How many people in the world have ever been named Yechiel? This is one of the famous Yechiels. The Aruch HaShulchan is Yechiel Michal Epstein. So I have a soft spot for famous Yechiels. The Aruch HaShulchan notes, I have the original over here. Where did we put it? I can't point to the wrong thing because you'll catch me like last time. It's over here. Says here that a person is not allowed to engage in healing unless he is an expert and unless he has permission from the courts. And in our case, nowadays, he needs to also have certification from the government and is given him permission to practice medicine for sick people. And he says also it has to be that there's no one better than him in that area, and if he does not keep these conditions, he's considered a murderer for practicing his form of medicine. Meaning, the Aruch HaShulchan very explicitly tells us that everyone practicing medicine, everyone trying to give an intervention to a sick person, is obligated to have some degree of certification from the courts, from the government, from somewhere. Now, this does not seem to be what all rabbis end up holding. It's an idea in halacha. It doesn't seem to come down that way, and you really don't get that impression from the Rebbe's letters that he's strict about this. However, the Rebbe adds a sort of kvetch on top of this idea, which is that at the very least they must have a good track record of success. So what I'll say, having modified the Aruch HaShulchan, read it into the Rebbe, and churned it out through poskim in general, is that condition number 2 is that the person doing it has to have some serious degree of experience. This cannot be a side gig. They can't be somebody who does a million other things, but between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m., you can meet them in their basement and they'll put an herb in your mouth. This needs to be what they do. They need to be good at what they do, and they need to have a good degree of expertise and a long track record of success. Ideally, they should be certified in some way. At least in America, there are many certifying bodies who certify alternative practitioners outside of the regular medical establishment. I don't know if that's the case here, is it? They should have, really, it's much better if they have certification. Okay, that's number 2. And number 3, this is the Rambam over here. Rambam and Yuma on the Mishnayos. He says here that a person is not allowed to take a cure that cannot be explained intellectually. That means, in my words, it must have a plausible mechanism of action. That does not mean a plausible Western mechanism of action. It doesn't need to pass an FDA clinical trial, according to Rambam. What it does need to do is it needs to make some sense. If someone says to you, I'm staring at your face and healing you with my good thoughts, That doesn't make enough sense. Now, Chakra Design Group makes a lot of sense, but that's not what that is. If somebody is telling you they're healing you and they can't explain how they're doing it, stay away. This is Jewish law. We don't do healing that cannot be explained. That doesn't mean the explanation has to be scientifically sound, but it's got to be explicable. With these three big ideas in mind, I'll skip that one for now. I'll show you my checklist. Hey, there's my medical professional. Look at him go. That's my alternative doctor. That's my witch doctor. I think you can tell AI made this. Or maybe not, honestly. This is the way a lot of their checklists look. It's just I have Newt over and over again. But here we go. On our alternative medicine checklist, we have 3 deal breakers. And as far as I'm concerned, because I'm in medical Jewish law is one of my areas, people call a lot to ask about interventions. I run through this checklist every time I'm answering whether something is on the table from a Jewish legal perspective. Once the law has been settled and something's permitted, then you can go to your mashpia, your local Orthodox rabbi, or somebody you trust, a friend, and ask, is this good for me? But if we want to know whether something is permitted according to Jewish law, we have 3 big questions. Number 1, is there idolatry or witchcraft? Number 2, does the therapy have a plausible mechanism of action? And number 3, is the practitioner either licensed, or at the very least, do they have a track record of success? With these 3 things, a person can feel fairly confident giving alternative medicine a try. There are a couple exceptions I'd like to show you, but I know some people want to take a picture of this, so I'll get my big head out of the way. Couple other considerations on the bottom of the screen. Number 1 is it's safe. The reason why I make that an additional consideration is because I think it's a given, but maybe it's not. If an alternative method kills a lot of people who take it, obviously you can't do it according to Jewish law. It's too risky. And a lot of people think, I don't know why, I don't know how this brand of ignorance made it into the world at large, I really don't. People think that plant-based medications are automatically safer than chemical medications. That is wild. We have some incredibly poisonous plants. There are things in nature that put to shame anything we can make in the laboratory. The fact that it's a plant doesn't make it safe. The fact that it's a plant that people take regularly that doesn't hurt them is what makes it safe. We have plants that kill people who, lick them. I mean, we have very dangerous plants. So things are not automatically safe because they're alternative. And by the way, very important to note, just as a medical professional speaking to a crowd of people who might be trying different things, it is very, very important not to try an alternative therapy along with a Western allopathic therapy without telling both sides what you're up to. Because it's very frequent, since a lot of the herbal medicines actually do something, meaning medically they do something, it's not in your head, they're real, they have real chemicals in them. And those real chemicals can interact very negatively with drugs that we create in the West, and a person can take a perfectly healthy supplemental plant along with a perfectly healthy drug that's made in a laboratory and die, God forbid, because of the mixture. So it's very important if you're doing both to let everybody who's involved in your care know what you're doing. Make sure you don't have unhealthy mixtures. At least in America, all doctors I know have a list they can very easily access on the internet that will tell them if any alternative medicine might negatively interact with a drug. But it's very important to establish that what you're doing is safe. So safe, I guess, is a given. Maybe it's not a given. I'm glad I talked about it. These 2 opinions are not universally accepted, but they're out there from major halachic authorities, and therefore they are a consideration point, and so I'm bringing them up. Rav Asher Weiss, who, as far as I'm concerned, I think as far as most people are concerned, is one of, if not the leading light in Jewish law in the world right now, and is very knowledgeable in medical law, wants to know, before you try alternative medicine, if conventional methods have failed. He does not want people starting with alternative medicine. He says, go to the doctor, the regular Western doctor, try it out because that's the majority, meaning try the majority approach. If it doesn't work, let's try alternative, but he doesn't want you starting with it. Now, I can't say that every rabbi agrees with him on this. This is a personal question, but it's worth knowing. It's worth knowing. And number 2, Rav Shlomo Zalman, who in his time was, I think, the undisputed leader of PSAC, of deciding Jewish law, especially when it comes to medical and scientific issues in general, he wants to know if it's a life or death issue. And he believes that if we have a life or death issue on the table, that is, a person has a condition that might kill them if they don't seek regular help, he doesn't want them using alternative medicine unless they're also doing conventional medicine. He says, for something that's life and death, you need to use what the majority of doctors are doing. Now, these 2 are a little more up in the air. Ask your rabbi. These are not really up in the air. You don't even have to ask your rabbi. I can tell you what, you should talk to your rabbi. Rabbis need people. Talk to us, call us. But, Rabbi Garner, what will we do if people stop calling us? We'll have to talk to each other. And please, talk to us. But on these 3 points, you don't need a rabbi. If there's idolatry, it's not for you. If it doesn't make any sense, it's not for you. If the practitioner doesn't know what they're doing, it's not for you. For these, have a discussion. Okay, that's alternative medicine. In case you want to see some primary sources, I skipped right through them. But there are some major rabbinic authorities that we respect greatly who are really not comfortable with alternative medicine, and you should be aware that some of them are less than comfortable with it. There are, of course, great rabbinic authorities that are comfortable with alternative medicine. They exist too, but in the interest of being fair and showing you a smattering here, I don't want to tell you it's just a clear sign-off. There absolutely are great rabbis of the prior generation who were uncomfortable with anything but the conventional majority medical opinion, and you should be aware of them. Rabbi Feinstein, it's published in HaMaor, volume 272, said that homeopathy is against the will of God and is forbidden to use. That's not a psak for you. He's not necessarily a rabbi. Ask your rabbi how seriously he takes that. But it's definitely part of the discussion. When you're Rav Moshe Feinstein and you say something, it becomes part of the discussion automatically. So this is part of the discussion, I told you Rav Asher Weiss already, but here's the actual quote from the Minchas Asher. He says there that one should avoid alternative medicine because it's not confirmed effective. I will say, as a person who does biomedicine for a living on the Western school of thought, that we have a word for alternative medicine that we have confirmed in laboratory studies. Do you know what we call it? Medicine, right. So any alternative method that passes a clinical trial, we promote to medicine. So he's completely right. The title alternative means that we have not been able to prove that it works. That's what we call alternative. So he makes a point. He says it's not confirmed effective. When there's no cure from conventional methods, why not turn to alternative methods? But as I told you before, he's not really comfortable with starting there. Worth knowing. Shalom Zalman Auerbach, this is related. You told me that you were saying over the story, right? I think you have a personal touch on this story. But in any event, the Torah generally allows you to choose what form of treatment you wish to use, which I think is very empowering for a lot of people who are interested in alternative medicine. The Torah lets you pick your vessel, the same way the Torah lets you pick your job. Right? God says everybody has to work, and that's how he's going to send money. He's going to send money, and I'm going to make a keli, and my keli is a job. You get to pick what job you have. You get to pick, as long as it's a kosher job, right? Same thing with medicine. You get to pick your doctor, and you get to pick your modality. So says Rav Shlomo Zalman, a person has every right to pick their modality. However, when it's a life or death matter, the Torah gives primacy to the form of treatment that's used by the majority of people, which right now in our world is Western allopathic medicine, which means that when it comes to life or death, he really doesn't want the alternative methods used. These are not written in stone, they're written on a slide, and therefore, take them to your rabbi. You should be aware of them. These, by the way, are pictures of each of those individuals.
Didn't the Rebbe say something along the lines of Rabbi Asher Weiss about using alternative as well?
Yes, but there's I think we have on our schedule a day where we're just going to do the Rebbe's letters on alternative medicine.
I think the Rebbe himself.
Hold on 1 second. It's on, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Thursday. On Thursday, we're doing a deep dive into the Rebbe on alternative medicine. It really goes enough of both ways that it's a subtle point we're going to have to make on Thursday. So yeah, Thursday, if you're interested in the morning, we're going to do a deep dive into the Rebbe's answers to specific alternative medicine modalities specific to the Rebbe. This lecture is much more overarching.
What are the limits of the protecting majority? Saying if everyone is doing a certain behavior?
The question was, and I'm going to do this, but then nobody else please until the end because we have a lot to get through. But I want to do this one. The question was, what are the limits of what the majority of people do is protective? There really isn't. There really isn't. Once the majority of people view something as safe, we have God coming in and saying, I'll provide a certain degree of protection for it, even if they're wrong. The reason why this is so powerful is that this means that God isn't going to let someone get hurt because they're not an expert medical researcher. That's what's so lovely about this approach. Because otherwise you have a world where the majority is wrong, and because we're all wandering around in our own ignorance, we all, God forbid, die young or get hurt. God doesn't let his world be run that way. So God does protect the majority misconception as long as it's the majority. An interesting implication of this that we'll see in just a moment, as far as I'm concerned, is that smoking was not nearly as dangerous as it is now in the 1800s. And just interesting. That would be one of the outcomes here. One of the outcomes here would be that once it became known that smoking is dangerous, it became dangerous. You need to have a certain kind of faith in God to believe that, but it's something worth discussing. It's not really for now, but that's where we're going to leave it for now.
Dying of other things.
Yes, always. Hey, I got to keep going, or else we won't get to cover any ground. I hope you'll forgive me for not taking any more questions. I hope you'll forgive me. I'm around after you. I don't leave. I'll stay here until 3 or 4 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever. I'm not going anywhere. Let me get through some more stuff, if you don't mind. We have so much to cover. We have so much to do. Huh? We have so much to do. Let's do childbirth and infertility. I think I wrote fertility. Yeah, let's not do infertility. Let's do fertility. Childbirth and fertility. I think the Rebbe doesn't like saying things in negative ways. Fertility is the field. Obviously, there's a ton to talk about here, and obviously, I am the least qualified person in Australia to talk about it. You literally have kosher IVF being run out of Sydney. These are the most qualified people in the world in these fields. So I'm going to just talk about a piece of it, just a small piece of it that I thought you might find interesting. First of all, how many children do we have in the room? Oh, maybe more, right? This is where babies come from. And there's 2 forms of, assisted childbirth fertility treatments, 2 dominant ones that exist in the world at large. One of them is known as artificial insemination, or IUI, and the other one is in vitro fertilization, which is known as IVF. For our discussion, it's just important to define the 2 terms, because it's difficult to talk about what we're about to talk about without knowing what we're talking about. Metzias does matter. So, when people talk about artificial insemination, nothing happens in a test tube. Or almost nothing happens. Nothing exciting happens in a test tube. Nothing exciting happens in the test tube. A lot of times, if two people are unable to have a baby, they go to the doctor, the sperm is harvested and injected directly into the uterus, the baby is fertilized, the sperm fertilizes the egg inside the uterus, baby develops in utero as normal, and the only thing that was taken out was the act that initiates the process of fertilization. But other than that, we're not bypassing much here. In something like, I forget the number, but it's a large number, more than half, significantly more than half of cases, infertility is solved by this relatively simple method. When that doesn't work, there's another option on the table, which is a lot more invasive. For the woman, this is minimally invasive. For the man, it's almost entirely non-invasive. This is not an invasive procedure. IVF is quite invasive. In IVF, we take out the egg, we take out the sperm, we put them together in a test tube of some kind, and we let the baby grow to blastocyst form. That is a certain degree of development around day 5. Blastocyst. This is the stage that an embryo, I don't even think it's called an embryo at this point, we call it a blastocyst. This is the stage at which the blastocyst is, in theory, capable of creating life if it implants on the uterine wall. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't create life. You then take this blastocyst and implant it directly. If, with God's help, it implants on the uterine wall, you get a baby. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's IVF. So IVF is when you hear about test tube babies, we're talking about IVF. We're not talking about IUI or artificial insemination. So I want to talk about IVF for just a second, just for some of the interesting Jewish law implications. Both procedures are allowed under specific circumstances. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide besides to say that kosher IVF is something that's done here. There are rabbis looking after it, and I do want to make this point. We talked a bunch today about the fact that a Jew can do almost anything if they do it right. And almost everything's kosher if it has a stamp of approval on it, but that doesn't mean that things are automatically kosher. And IVF is without a doubt not automatically kosher. IVF that's done without rabbinic supervision can cause enormous problems that shake the very foundations of the Jewish family and Jewish lineage. IVF without rabbinic supervision is an enormous problem. And the biggest reason why it's an enormous problem without rabbinic supervision is because of the sheer number of mistakes we make in IVF every day. The organization in America known as PUA, in Bnei Elam, they supervise IVF in America to make sure that things are being done properly. They say that they have prevented 50 mistakes. What mistakes did they prevent? Tell you the one that happens the most often. Implanting the wrong baby in the wrong person. Much more common than you would think when not being watched. What's done, and I believe by kosher IVF, although I don't know how you do it here, I know that's how Pua and Bnei Elam do it, is we have literal mashgichim who watch the test tube the entire time to make sure a woman gets her baby instead of somebody else's. You know what happens when you don't have that? A lot of problems. These are some headlines I just pulled at one point. This is any snapshot in time, you'll get a ton of these. IVF mother, I love him to bits, but he's probably not mine. An IVF mix-up, a shocking discovery, and an unbearable ... I don't know. Georgia woman sues fertility clinic for implanting wrong egg after she birthed another couple's baby. This happens quite frequently. Quite frequently? I don't know. Happens often enough that when it's... Yes?
It happened more than once in the spring.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Look at how many times it happened in America. These are American cases, right? This happens, I'm not going to say it happens the majority of the time, but it happens enough that unsupervised IVF is something that a Jew has no business being involved in. The supervised IVF, a Jew has all the business in the world being involved in with rabbinical support. It's a legitimate concern. There's a reason why we're careful about these things to make sure that IVF is done properly. It's not a theoretical problem. As you mentioned, it's happened in Australia. I tell you for a fact it's happened several times in America. It happens. And it's very important to make sure that people get the babies that are genealogically theirs for very important Jewish law reasons. If we don't know whose a baby's parents are, then we can't let them marry anybody. If I don't know who your parents are, you can't marry anybody, because how do I know you're not marrying your brother or your sister? It becomes a big issue. Now, I'm not saying we don't have ways around it. If somebody, God forbid, is born this way, they're still a holy child of God. They'll come to the Jewish court and we'll do what we can, but you just don't want to start life like this. You don't want to make these problems for a child. If someone is in the parsha of assisted fertility, which nobody should know from, because God should send everybody blessings the moment they want them, and the greatest blessing of all is children. So we shouldn't know of such things. But if someone knows of such things, please talk to a rabbi. Make this child's life easy rather than hard. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one. I'm going to actually skip it just to tell you, it is not at all clear that the Rebbe is happy with the idea of IVF. And this is something that the rabbis here and the Chabad rabbis around the world have dealt with in significant publications. The Rebbe is hesitant about IVF. In here, the Rav in Arad asked the Rebbe for a bracha for IVF to be successful, and the Rebbe wrote, "That's allowed?" Which is not exactly the answer you want when you ask for a blessing. So it's a discussion. It's not one I have time to go into today. Please ask me about it afterwards. It is noteworthy that the Rebbe is not necessarily gung-ho about the idea of IVF. What I want to talk about today from a Jewish law perspective is whether an IVF embryo is alive. And I want to tell you why this matters. Maybe you can see behind me on the screen why this matters. How many of you heard this story? It's a big story in America. Did any of you hear about it? I don't know how much you care about Alabama. We don't care that much about Alabama. But I'm with you. We have shluchim in Alabama. We care about the Jews in Alabama. All three of them are very dear to us. Jews in Alabama, I mean. All three Jews in Alabama, we love them very much. But Alabama is not exactly the part of America known for its vibrant Jewish life, although the shluchim there are changing it every single day because they're incredible. Now, that said, having made a joke and apologized for it, allow me to return to our regularly scheduled program. We had a case I think maybe not a year or two back now. I don't remember how long ago it was. Maybe a year or two ago in America, we had a case. A woman went into an IVF clinic. She decided that she wanted to take some of the test tubes for herself. I don't know what she was thinking, but she decided to grab them. You might know the way that you keep these things alive for a long time is by freezing them. They were very cold. She grabbed the thing that was freezing, got upset, and dropped them, and basically knocked over a shelf of babies. She knocked over a baby shelf. Babies, not really. I mean, people imagine you have your test tube with a little homunculus inside it. That's not what you have. You have a blastocyst. You have a cell that has been fertilized that is not very big. Microscopic. You're talking very, very small. However, this went to the Supreme Court in Alabama, I believe. It was in Alabama. Went to the Supreme Court. They had the Alabama IVF ruling, and they ruled that what she did was manslaughter. She murdered a bunch of babies. Right, because in America you have some states that consider the very earliest moments of life alive, and they said these were potential people. She murdered a whole shelf of potential people. Now, with this decision, they ground IVF to a halt in America completely. For a period of time, I think I have a story like that. Yeah, generally speaking, there were a bunch of hospitals that for a couple weeks, until this was settled later on, which I'll tell you about in a moment, just stopped IVF. They wouldn't do it. Too much liability. Because in the process of IVF, you inevitably lose some of these blastocysts. You freeze them, and if you don't freeze them, they have to be thrown away. If the ones that you don't implant, you take more than you need. The ones that don't get implanted, without a doubt, are disposed of. Which means that if the law is that a blastocyst is a living thing, and disposing of it is a form of abortion and murder, then no one can do IVF anywhere in America without committing murder. IVF cannot be done without disposing of a blastocyst, or at least putting it in a state that humans would not want to be in, freezing it indefinitely, which certainly they didn't have the fridge space for. That's not how I would put it, fridge space. But they didn't have the fridge space for it. That's it. So IVF was essentially ground to a halt in America during this story. In the end, it was overturned, and in the end, there was a whole appeal, and it turned out to be okay, and Alabama also doesn't think that. But I wanted to take a moment to discuss the Jewish perspective, and by that I mean God's perspective, and by that I mean the truth. Is a blastocyst a living thing? If it is, then we can't really have kosher IVF. Because IVF inevitably involves the death of a blastocyst or two, these form of cells about 5 days into conception, before implantation in the uterus. If this thing's alive, then we can't do IVF no matter how many people are watching over. Kosher IVF is going to be dead in the water. Now, you probably can tell, I'm not going to get rid of kosher IVF, especially not in this town, where in Australia, where the concept was more or less invented. But I will show you why it works. I want to show you why it works. You ask a rabbi a question, you're going to get different opinions. This is one of the only times I've looked into an issue and I've been unable to find a rabbinic opinion in one direction. Meaning, everybody agrees. This is wild to me. I have a friend, I'm not going to say his name because, video, but hi, friend. I have a friend who is a Lubavitcher, who's a Rav, who's famously good at finding dissenting opinions for things. I put him to work. I said, can you find me anybody, the most fringe, ridiculous opinion within the realm of Orthodox Judaism who says that a blastocyst is a living thing that we're not allowed to kill? And he couldn't find any. Everybody agrees these things are not alive. That this is not where life begins. That life does not begin at blastocyst. We weren't able to find any authority that thinks life begins at blastocyst. There might be one, but the fact that he couldn't find one suggests to me that if this is one, he's in a bunker somewhere. Everybody agrees these things are not alive. Everybody agrees these things are not alive. The question is, why not? I have a couple opinions on the screen, and I guess they're all valuable because they're all holy rabbis, but I must say, I'm a little biased. I know a good deal of science. This is my field, biomedicine specifically. This part of it is very much in my field. We deal with this every day. And I got to tell you, Rav Zalman Nechemia and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, their opinion on the bottom, I don't want to say better. I don't want to get in trouble, and also I don't mean better. It's more scientifically sound than the other opinions on the screen. This one, every scientist in the world would agree with. The other ones are a little bit up for grabs. So I want to just teach this last one because it's so scientifically sound. We mentioned Rav Zalman Nechemia recently, right? Did he ever come here? No? Incredibly important Rav. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel at one point, I believe, yes? Yes, two very important Rabbanim. They note, correctly so, that a blastocyst that does not implant on the uterine wall could never become a baby. Ever. If you were to people imagine that if you were to just let these blastocysts stay in the test tube, you'd have a test tube baby. That's impossible. At that point, development stops and does not continue unless it finds the wall of the uterus. Unless it implants on the uterine wall, you don't have life at all, which means this is not a potential baby. This is the seed of a potential baby. This is going to have the status of a sperm cell or an egg cell, which obviously we don't waste for no reason, but it certainly is not alive. A blastocyst is as alive as a sperm or egg cell. It can never become a baby without other steps. However, once a blastocyst has implanted on the uterine wall, if we don't stop it, that does become a baby. So at that point, we begin talking in Jewish law about whether something is alive or not. But prior to implantation, there's nothing to talk about. This could never be a baby. So I think that's the most sound of the halachic analyses, but a couple of them are on the screen. Thought you'd find them interesting. They're up here if you want to take a look. All right. Moves me to drug use and abuse. Did you guys, I don't know, I gave this talk in London one time, they didn't get the reference. Do you have Just Say No out here? In London they don't. This is Just Say No. So I had AI make me a Just Say No. I feel like my slides involve a lot of rabbis with boxing gloves. I gotta work on that. For those of you who were here in prior days, this is my second time a rabbi is boxing. I want to talk about drugs. With the limited time that we have left. I think we'll probably go 10 minutes over because we started 10 minutes late. But more than that, I don't think I can do, right, Rabbi? You'll call me. Okay. Let's start with some basic Jewish law. I want to talk about drug use and abuse, and I want to start by saying that we are not fans of drug use and abuse. This is Rav Moshe Feinstein is on the screen behind me. He has a very famous letter in Igros Mesha about why Jews cannot smoke marijuana. Now, this is not necessarily entirely applicable nowadays, at least in America. What is the law here about marijuana? Legal, illegal? In America, it's more or less legalized at this point. Medical legal, but recreationally not. In America, I believe recreationally it's been decriminalized across the board, and in most states legal entirely now, or at least a lot. So some of the things that he says are not applicable anymore because some of them are based on the legality. But if you read his concerns, he has 4 big concerns about people involved in marijuana, and they're worth pointing out. Number 1, he says, there's a prohibition, we learned it yesterday or the day before, against risky activities. A Jew's not allowed to do things that might put their life at risk. The way we define life at risk is, ask the average doctor, is it safe? If you ask the average doctor, is recreational marijuana safe? At least then they would have said no. I don't know. That might have changed. That might have changed. So, question mark next to this one. Question mark. Certainly in large amounts. You gotta ask the average doctor. You gotta do your own research for this one. By that I mean ask your doctor. That's what I mean by do your own research. I don't mean, God forbid, to waste your life Googling when you could be spreading good and doing Torah and mitzvahs. I mean ask your doctor. Right, okay. V'yizem kedeshim. This is a prohibition in the Torah that the Ramban brings as an actual one of the 613 commandments, that we are not allowed to indulge excessively in anything. We take what we need from the world, but not more just because it feels good. Which means drug use for recreational purposes is always off the table for a Jew because it's excessive. You do not need it to stay alive. If it's a medication, it's a medication. But that would also rule out caffeine that I don't need to stay awake, right? This is a general prohibition against indulging excessively in anything, including completely safe things. But it actually brings it as a possibility. The din of Ben Sora Mora, the stubborn and rebellious son who ends up killed, although it never happened in the history of the Jewish people, this never happened, but in theory, if a child eats enough meat, drinks enough wine, and steals from their parents and does it in a proper sequence, and the parents do a list of things as well, that child is put to death preemptively because we say that this particular kind of person will 100% of the time turn out to be a menace to society who will do greater crimes, and we kill them before they can cause more trouble. That's the law. If it makes you uncomfortable, I will tell you it never happened and never will happen. This is a guarantee from the Talmud. It is an area where somebody who studies it receives a reward for studying the will of God, but will never have to implement it. So if it scares you, don't be scared. It's probably one of the only parts of the Torah that's truly meant to be theoretical. That said, we see from Ben Sora Mora that there is something inherently wrong with indulging excessively, and that it is a slippery slope toward horrible crimes. And so Ramesh is worried about that too. And finally, this one, people do not take this one seriously enough. This also may have changed a little bit, but how many people involved in marijuana's parents want them to be involved in marijuana? How many people who take drugs, their parents are happy about it? You know you're not allowed to do something your parents aren't happy about unless it's a mitzvah? Remember the 10 Commandments? Kibud Avim. Honoring your father and mother means that unless your father and mother are pushing back against your ability to self-actualize as a Jew and as a human, you're not allowed to disobey them. If you want to ride a bike, and your parents say, we forbid bike riding, find a different outlet. That's Jewish law. Your parents are allowed to tell you, we don't want you to do something that you don't need. And given that this is not needed, the parents are allowed to say, we don't want you to do it. So Ramesh is concerned about drugs in general. I tried to get out of the way, and then I realized, it's my lecture. Maybe I should get in the way. We did this slide previously. I'm not going to do it again, just to remind you, dangerous activities. We're talking about drugs, illegal drugs, or drugs that are recreational. Let me just frame this a little bit, although I know I'm short on time. I do need to do some framing. If a doctor gives you a medication, we already know that we can take it, right? Well, generally, yes. If it's a Western medicine, we don't have to worry too much because there's no idolatry. If it's an Eastern technique, we got to determine that it doesn't have idolatry in it. And it has to have some plausible mechanism of action, and a doctor who knows what they're doing has to give it to us. But if a medical doctor wants to give me medical marijuana for a medical condition, then as far as I'm concerned and the rabbinate is concerned, take it with joy. It's a medicine. We're not talking about medical interventions here. We're talking about recreational drug use. People who take drugs because it feels good. Taking drugs because it feels good, if they are dangerous, is automatically off the table for a Jew because we're not allowed to put our lives in danger. We learned this yesterday, or the day before. I'll just repeat the main point of it. The main point here is that Barabella, at the very end of Shulchan Aruch, says that the greatest crime of heresy a person can commit is putting their life in danger. That's the greatest heresy, greater than idolatry. Greater than declaring that they don't believe or don't have a portion in God and Israel itself is the declaration, the inherent declaration, that I don't care about my own life and I would throw my life away for a cheap thrill. So if something's dangerous, we just can't do it at all. So if it's a dangerous drug, there isn't really a discussion. That means smoking is predictably off the table, really predictably off the table. Smoking cigarettes. At this point, it is so clear the dangers of cigarettes. Probably one of the strongest correlations in medicine. My father, I told you, is a urologist. He would like me to note, every time I say this, if I say it wrong, I get a call from him. I will get a call. He watches. My father and mother watch every class that I give, or listen to them. They follow everything. And I will get in trouble if I don't clarify this. So, Tati, I am clarifying that the correlation between lung cancer and cigarette smoking is one of the strongest correlations in medicine, but that the correlation between cigarette smoking and bladder cancer is stronger. Okay? Okay, fine. It's cancer. I don't know the people. Well, if I knew bladder cancer, I wouldn't have done it. Lung cancer, I was okay with. I don't know. But yeah, very strongly correlated. Very strongly correlated. Smoking's a real bad idea. And nonetheless, we have a pretty strong history of our Rebbes of Chabad being involved in smoking before it was known to be dangerous. There are all these stories. It's not just for Chabad Rebbes, Hasidic Rebbes. The Ruzhiner had a pipe that would extend all the way down to the ground. If you wanted to become his chassid, you'd smoke it. That's how you created a connection with him. There's a whole story about his pipe magically removing itself from his mouth on Erev Shabbos because God protected him from Shabbos violations. We have the holy pipe of the Baal Shem Tov is mentioned in many sources. There's a source that says that the Mittler Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad, one time reviewed the entire Talmud while smoking his pipe. This was part of life back then, until it became clear it was dangerous. And that is what I want to point out to you. The Frierdiker Rebbe here depicted with a cigarette between his fingers. This is the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He smoked. And he smoked a good deal. As a matter of fact, they say that he smoked so much. I had to ask a friend what this means. I didn't even know what this meant. I had to ask a friend what this means. They say about him that he smoked a one-light cigarette, which would mean that he would light his cigarette in the morning and then use it to light the next one when it burned down to the bottom and just keep on chain smoking. So he smoked a lot. He smoked a lot of cigarettes a lot of times. Around the time that medical advice started coming out that it was dangerous, the Frierdiker Rebbe met with a doctor. And in this conversation with the doctor, they were both smoking, because that's what you did back then with your doctor. You smoked, right? And the doctor said to him, there's some data coming out. I believe Germany was where the first data sets came out that showed that smoking was correlated to disease. This was in the very early days of it. And this doctor tells the Frierdiker Rebbe, people say that's dangerous for your health. And the Frierdiker Rebbe put down his cigarette and let it go out. He finished examining the Frierdiker Rebbe, this one here who smoked like a chimney, with respect. I smoked constantly, and by all natural means would have been incredibly addicted. The doctor says to him, would you like me to light up your cigarette? And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, no, I don't smoke. Never picked one up again. The moment that he found that this was a violation of Jewish law, the moment it became a violation of Jewish law, the Frierdiker Rebbe had no interest in it. Now, this is not a story for everybody to implement, because this could be very dangerous for a person who's not a tzaddik. But a perfectly righteous person is in complete control of their body by definition. That's what righteousness means. A true tzaddik, their body does not control them at all, which means a tzaddik is impervious to addiction. So for the Frierdiker Rebbe, it was as easy as deciding he didn't want to do something that would have been forbidden. I'm going to have to take your question after. When we move out, I can do easily. But the Frierdiker Rebbe picked it up again. In addition to that, he put out a statement. And he wrote, in 1943, before most Chabad smokers nowadays were born, I hereby strictly forbid smoking for all students in his yeshiva under the age of 20. This is in a printed letter. All other students should be asked in my name for their own spiritual and physical good to attempt to quit by reducing daily until they quit entirely. All who will fulfill my request will benefit in physicality and spirituality. He was saying this. If you're under 20, forbidden to start. If you're already addicted, I can't force you to quit because quitting is hard and not everybody can do it. But I'm asking you for your own spiritual and well-being and for my blessing to slowly wean yourself off of it safely. Also, Seir Hashem L'Re'ah. A tzaddik knows everything. But let me tell you something. Whether he knew it in his mind or knew it in his soul, I don't know. I'm not a tzaddik. I don't know how this works. But this is the way to end smoking completely. Because almost nobody starts smoking after age 20. Statistically, almost nobody in their 30s or in their young 20s even starts smoking. When everybody starts and becomes addicted, it's generally speaking before age 20. So by cutting off students under age 20, anybody who listened to him would essentially never become addicted. How many 35-year-olds have you met who started smoking then? It's essentially unheard of. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's advice is incredibly good. It's incredibly valid, incredibly powerful. It works. In 1979, a woman wrote to the Rebbe and said that she's very frustrated that the Rebbe has not outlawed smoking. You have to forbid this with strong words. It's known to be dangerous. It causes lung cancer and even bladder cancer. It's incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. Why hasn't the Rebbe done anything about it, she demands. And if you know the Rebbe at all, you know that this was a fun letter to read back. Can you imagine what the Rebbe responds to the demand that he should do something? Right? I mean, come on. So, first of all, there's many points that Rebbe makes in this letter. I won't make all of them, but I want to make a few. One of the points that Rebbe makes is that he's not willing to forbid something completely just because right now it's unsafe. Perhaps one day they'll make a safe version of it. So you don't want to rule something out entirely. The din is that unsafe is unsafe. But we don't rule out ideas, we rule out modalities, right? So the current state of cigarettes is not allowed because it's dangerous, but I'm not ruling it out completely forever. Perhaps one day it will be. They still haven't, by the way. There is no safe cigarette yet. But that doesn't mean one day there won't be a way to, I don't know, smoke water vapor and be, whatever. I don't know. Number two, another major point he makes in this letter is that not everybody can quit, and for some older people who've been smoking for a long time, it might be dangerous to quit. The Rebbe says, I want you going to your doctor and asking, should I quit? Which is the way a rabbi talks about medical issues when a rabbi's not being horrible. A good rabbi, and the Rebbe is much more than a good rabbi, but he also at the baseline is a good rabbi, and then built on top of that, the Nasi Adar. A good rabbi doesn't give medical advice, a good rabbi says, ask your doctor. So the Rebbe says, I want your doctor to tell you to quit, and then of course you have to quit. But I can't rule that you have to quit. Perhaps a doctor will say to some person, it's dangerous for you to quit, you've been doing this for too long, you're in your 90s, this could hurt you. The Rebbe doesn't want to give a medical ruling, he's giving legal rulings as a Jew. But finally, the Rebbe says to this woman, he writes back to her, since you're so concerned about the physical health of the Jewish people, I assume you're equally concerned, at least, about the spiritual health of the people, and that you will add in Torah and mitzvahs and strengthen your community. And he gives her a laundry list of things she has to do. That's what you get for engaging with the Rebbe, a mission. But along the way, the Rebbe says something else, and I have it up here on the screen. The Rebbe says, what do you want from me? There's already a mitzvah to guard your health. It's literally in the Torah. Rabbis don't have to issue a directive that smoking is prohibited. The Torah did that. The Torah tells us we're not allowed to do things that put our lives in danger. Says the Rebbe, why am I going to issue a ruling saying smoking's not allowed? That's obvious that smoking's not allowed. Despite the fact that the Rebbe said this in 1979, it took until 2006 for the Rabbinical Council of America to forbid smoking. However, it is now universally understood to be forbidden for reasons of danger. I know I'm way over time. I just want to note that e-cigarettes and vaping are not significantly safer. The only reason why we don't have enormous death rates out of cigarettes and e-cigarettes and vaping is because people have not lived long enough to die from it. That's the reason why. You know, in the first 20 years of people smoking cigarettes, you wouldn't have seen death rates. You got to be pretty old to die of lung cancer or bladder cancer. Everything that we know about e-cigarettes and vapes, is that what they call them here? E-cigarettes, vaping, you know the terms? Everything we know about, it's those ugly things. Everything we know about these suggests that they would be as dangerous, in some cases perhaps even more dangerous, than smoking cigarettes. The only valid use of an e-cigarette or a vape, medically speaking, is as a way of weaning oneself off regular cigarettes. It's a really good way to quit. It's been used as a quitting method. But these things are just as dangerous. I mean, I have a list here of all the things that are inside them. I will say, I don't need a show of hands because I know people feel sensitive about this, but I know that there are some people in the room, usually in a room like this, about half the room, who are not comfortable with the COVID vaccine. I know that that has to be here. I can tell you this. I'm not going to make a comment on the COVID vaccine. I'm going to make a comment about medicine, the state of medicine in the world at large. If we tried our best, if every one of the American laboratories got together with nothing but nefarious intent to put every chemical they could in a vaccine to destroy the world at large and put it all in the COVID vaccine, it still would not be even slightly as dangerous as what they put in e-cigarettes. It just would. We couldn't fit this in a vaccine. So if you're nervous about vaccines, you definitely don't belong with a vape pen. That's all I'm saying. We couldn't, if we tried, make something this poisonous. It's so dangerous, so dangerous. I mean, look at the list of stuff in this. You can't fit this in a vaccine. So it's noteworthy. If you don't like vaccines, you really don't like cigarettes. Rabbi, I know I'm out of time. Should I keep going or should I stop? What do I do?
I might as well finish it off.
Wrap up this section, okay. I gotta talk about alcohol though, as long as we're here. You can't talk about cigarettes and not alcohol. Huh? What'd you say? Mincha, he says Mincha's at 7:15. You hear that? Please, let me make that announcement. That way everybody feels good about it. I know people have places to go, and I'm so sorry for taking up more of your time than necessary. Please don't feel awkward leaving. The lecture is done. I'm going to keep talking for anybody who wants to stay. But please, I won't even be slightly offended. The rabbi won't be even slightly offended. I speak for the rabbi. If you need to leave, please do leave. It's not personal. You heard great stuff. It's recorded. And so please, do stand up and go if you need to go. But I'm going to keep talking for a bit, I guess, if you don't mind. Yes? Oh, okay. I guess they don't mind. But please, if you have to leave, go. I'm somebody who attends lectures and has places to be in my regular life. I absolutely be one of the people walking out of the room right now. Not because I wasn't having fun, but because I have a life. If you have a life to get to, please go to. I don't mean to say you guys don't have lives, but sometimes, you know. I want to emphasize how much I understand if you have to walk out of the room right now. Please don't feel weird about it. Okay. That said, let's talk about more dangerous things that are off the table for a Jew. Getting drunk is off the table for a Jew. Yeah, I know. They didn't leave before, but now they're leaving. You know? Never mind, I don't have to listen to this. I will say that it says in the Code of Jewish Law that a person is obligated, an adult man, is obligated on Purim to drink until they are completely drunk, so drunk that they don't know the major characters of the Purim story. On Purim, there's a discussion to be had with your rabbi. Outside of Purim, nobody belongs drunk. Drinking is not the same as drunk. Drunk is off the table outside of Purim, and might be off the table on Purim too. Ask your dear rabbi. Or ask your dear Rebbitzin, and they'll give you advice. Let's not talk about Purim. There are other days of the year people drink, and they should not be drunk. Drinking is not the same as drunk. And if you can't drink responsibly, you can't drink at all. That's the way it works. I want to give you some examples. Just look at the Torah here. I'm not going to read all of them. I just have examples. The Torah doesn't say don't get drunk. The Torah shows don't get drunk. Every time someone gets drunk, something horrible happens. It's a show don't tell, a classic show don't tell. You have a Gemara in Tractate Brachas on 40a, where everybody's trying to figure out what fruit Adam and Eve ate that got them in so much trouble. I must tell you, it could be almost anything but an apple. It's like that. The only thing that Lahavdil the Christians think it wasn't that. But like every other fruit's on the table. Rebbe Meir doesn't think it was a fruit, he thinks it was a grape. That's not even a kind of fruit. It grows on a vine, not a tree. Why does Rebbe Meir think it's a grape? And Rebbe Meir explains, he says, I racked my brain and I couldn't think of anything a person can put in their body that causes so much sorrow and pain as alcohol. So I suspect that's the fruit of the original sin. And look, this is how Rebbe Meir sees alcohol, as the only fruit that could have caused this much trouble. I'll go on. Huh? I mean, what about, I didn't even include this, what about Noach? Noach is a big tzaddik. We sing in our community, from his Kepala to his Fislach, Noach was a big tzaddik. Noah's an incredible tzaddik. He has a downfall, and it's when he drinks too much wine. Again and again and again, the Torah shows us great people are destroyed by too much alcohol. Not by a holy amount, not by making Kiddush on Shabbos, not by sacramental wine, but by getting drunk. That getting drunk is destructive. We have here, it's brought in by Yikur Rabbah this way, but of course it's a story that's in the Torah itself, that Aaron's sons on the happiest and holiest day of the year get incinerated because they walk into the temple drunk. They had this idea, maybe you've heard this idea before, that perhaps I could serve God with more joy and more intensity if I was drunk. Have you heard people say this before? They're not the first ones to think of it. None of you had this idea. They said a big old l'chaim on a big, big glass and ran off to serve God Almighty in the temple, and God had 2 flames of fire come out from the temple, go in their nostrils, incinerate their insides, and drop them dead. That's the way that the Torah views the idea that I serve God best when drunk. Incineration. We're not fans. We're not fans. We're not fans. We really aren't. Rav told his son Rabbi Chia, had a bunch of good advice, and among them was al tishti sama, which means don't drink drugs. I assume it's an opiate of some kind. Rabbi and Rabbi Zera once celebrated Purim together. Come Rabbi B'Shach and Rabbi Zera. Now this is explained in Chassidus as Rabbi lifted Rabbi Zera to a new level, but let me tell you the pshat. Pshat is, Rabbi and Rabbi Zera got together for Purim one year, drank until they were drunk, and one killed the other one. Now, to be fair, he brought him back to life afterwards. Classic Rabbah, right? So he was fine, everybody's fine. No rabbis were hurt in the production of this slide, but it's impossible not to read that on Pshat as a cautionary tale. People get drunk, dangerous things happen. We can talk about whether alcohol has a place in Judaism. I believe it does in moderation in small amounts. But intoxication has no place in Judaism besides perhaps Purim, and that's a question for your rabbi. It's in the Code of Jewish Law, so I can't push there, but I'll push everywhere else. Look at this. I have here some proof that being drunk, not drinking, being drunk, is incompatible with spirituality. You cannot become spiritual while drunk. If you ask me afterwards, I'll bring with you about why Purim is a natural exception to these rules. But outside of Purim, without a doubt, it's incompatible. Incompatible. Number one, according to Jewish law, A person cannot pray when they're drunk. A drunk person who prays is considered somebody who has worshipped idols. So prayer is off the table. Well, prayer isn't the only way a Jew can talk to God Almighty, right? There are other ways to relate to God. How about the study of Torah? Forbidden. Not allowed to rule in Jewish law and draw God's will down into the world while intoxicated. Well, let's not, wait. I'm drunk. I can't pray. I can't learn Torah. What about the sacred task of every single Jew, which I believe actually Rabbi Groner is going to be speaking about on Wednesday? Your power to give blessings to another. What about blessing our fellow Jew? Canceled. Not allowed to give a blessing while drunk. I'll take your question after if you don't mind. Which means to me, there are two ways we can talk to God. We can ascend up to God Almighty or draw His inspiration down into the world. Both are cut off to a person who's inebriated. Meaning intoxication prevents the process of us becoming one with God or drawing God into the world. Why are we here? We're here to go up or bring down, and both are closed while we're drunk. So if you were to ask, let me ask it a little differently, let me say it a little differently. Somebody calls me, Rabbi, I want to do something. It will prevent me from having any relationship with God for about 2 hours, followed by excessive vomiting. What do you say? The fact that this is a no is so simple to anybody who's looking at it the way a Jew looks at things. We don't do things that cut off our ability to talk to God, especially that have side effects. Right? Okay. So it's simple, this isn't for a Jew. I don't think he's drunk. He's just having fun. He's just standing on his head. Okay, I can't not ask this, right? I'm sure somebody was thinking of this question, so why are Chassidim drinking so much? Who here has seen a Chassid have a l'chaim before? Okay, l'chaim, right? This is coffee, I promise. It is. It's coffee, which is its own kind of drug, but I think a permitted version. If I discover it's truly dangerous, I'll stop, just like the Frida Kahlo, put it right down. You know, there have been something like 100 studies that I collected at one point for an article I wrote, about 100 studies showing that coffee prevents cardiovascular disease, prevents cancer, and about 100 studies showing that it causes it. So I don't know, even, I guess they cancel each other out, I don't know. At this point, the state of medicine on what coffee does is equivalent to the state of a guessing game. But anyway, regarding alcohol, this is one example of many cases where the Rebbe asked Chassidim to drink less. And the Rebbe asks Chassidim again and again to drink less. And the Rebbe understands again and again the problem of excessive drinking. And he really brings it to the fore. And the reason why Chassidim still drink so much is the same reason why anybody does a sin that their heart wants to do but their mind knows they shouldn't do. Because they have a Yetzer Hara that they need to work on, that's why. It's not because our Rebbe wants us getting drunk all the time, that's for sure. Purim's on the table for discussion. Other than that, look at this. This is a quote from the Rebbe, I translated this. Although a farbrengen is associated with physical matters such as eating and drinking, so you go to a farbrengen, you gotta eat, you gotta drink. It's understood and obvious. The Rebbe says it's obvious. The one must be careful that the drinking does not lead to bilbul hadas. We'd be careful to make sure that if I'm drinking alcohol, it doesn't alter my mind. How much more clearly do you want the Rebbe to say, have a l'chaim but don't get drunk? If you're not good to drive, you're outside the realm of the farbrengen. You're not in a farbrengen if you're not good to drive. Have a little sip of something and then enjoy the experience. The drinking should be, the Rebbe's words, the absolute minimum quantity. The Rebbe's not canceling l'chaim, he's limiting l'chaim to a little bit for a full-grown person for whom it will not change their mental status. With all necessary limitations. How many times do you have to say this? And then this line, this is my kicker. If you truly desire to connect to what's happening at the farbrengen, the quantity of hard liquor is irrelevant. Somebody who truly wants to feel drunk on Chassidus only needs a little bit of alcohol to touch their tongue. They don't need to be drunk. Drunk is for people who don't want to put in the work. Outside of Purim, of course. Where there's a code of Jewish law, we'll talk about it. But outside of Purim, drunk is for people who don't want to put in the work. And lazy is not a good look for a Jew. And it certainly isn't a good look for a Chassid. I know, they just keep on going, right? I have all the drugs on this one though. Marijuana. Let's go through this slide quickly. The Rebbe says no. He's not a fan of marijuana. Once again, this doesn't apply to medical marijuana. It's the simplest thing in the world, but I want to repeat it. Once a doctor prescribes a medicine, no matter how dangerous it is, you can take it. Would anybody here agree that it's a good idea to recreationally take chemotherapy? Nobody gives a high. No, it's poison. Okay, fine, it's poison. So now I'm going to make a statement. Cancer patients should not have chemotherapy. It's poison. Also no, right? Once something is a medicine, it's for the sick to make them better. It's not for recreation. If we're talking medical marijuana prescribed by a doctor, it's a medicine. We're talking recreation. I don't want to read them all. I want to keep moving. I want to go to the last. I have one more slide. And I want to get to it because I know people need to go. But let me just point out this one. This one's great. Somebody asked the Rebbe, it's in a 1977 minus, in one of those short correspondences. Somebody writes to the Rebbe asking whether it is a bad thing. I think the lashon is maybe yesh avel, I think is what he used with an ayin. To smoke marijuana, lashen marijuana, with a ches is how it's spelled in the letter, because the Rebbe is writing back in response to your question whether it's a gross thing, a disgusting thing, a lowly thing to smoke marijuana, lashen marijuana. The Rebbe writes, biyeser uveyeser, biyoter uveyoter. Very, 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 very bad. Well, I'm shocked you would even ask me something so elementary. So there's a movement among some Chassidim, I guess, who are just, they're ignorant, so they need to be taught, right? Who think that somehow our Rebbe could get behind the idea of using marijuana to augment a spiritual experience, recreation, to open the mind. Right? I'm shocked you would even ask something so ridiculous. The Rebbe's already answered this again and again. Individuals who ask about using marijuana to broaden their minds and give themselves inspirational experiences, it's off the table. If a person's sick, they can use it to get better. If a person's doing it for spiritual purposes, absolutely not. The authority on spirituality, our Nasi, says no. What do you know that he doesn't know about spirituality? My God, people. Okay. Which brings me to my final point of frustration. I hope you're on this journey with me and just not watching me lose my mind. Are we together? I hope we're together. Psychedelics. The current scourge, unfortunately. I hope this hasn't made it to your community, and I hope it never does. Australia's far away. I hope it would have to swim.
We got
it has?
We have mushrooms.
Once again, if these things, once again, we have mushrooms, and let me tell you something. Once again, if a medical professional wants to prescribe any of these things, no, so great. The moment a medical professional wants to use something as a medication, we're not having a discussion anymore. Now, we take our medicine and trust in God, whether that's magic mushrooms, marijuana, or God forbid chemotherapy. And honestly, maybe all three of those are God forbids when they're in the wrong context, right? We're not talking about medical. In America, right now, there's some really interesting trials going on with ketamine therapy for PTSD. We don't really know where they're going yet. I will tell you that the early results are quite promising for ketamine being a good way to prevent PTSD, but not necessarily to solve the long-standing kind. These are interesting studies. Anything that becomes a medicine is not for us to discuss because it's obviously mutter. As long as it doesn't involve idolatry, it's being done, has a plausible mechanism of action, and is being given out by a medical professional. We're talking recreational, or more specifically, people believe that if they go on an ayahuasca trip, that's the tea people drink for a hallucinogenic experience, or that they take some mushrooms, or they have some LSD, which I don't think is cool anymore. You know, nowadays ayahuasca is the old LSD. I have a buddy in Pomona named Rabbi Reuven Flamer. Maybe some of you know Reuven Flamer. Do you know Reuven Flamer? He's fantastic. He's a close friend of mine. Reuven Flamer said to me recently, he goes, you know, in the 60s we all figured out that LSD was worthless. How did ayahuasca come back? He says, we ruled out hallucinogens in the 60s. Somehow people have, so he's quite frustrated with this, and he actually knows a thing or two about it. Anyway, we're not talking medical. We're talking for spiritual experience. Somebody who says, we're going to get a group together, and we're all going to go on a journey, and it'll help us daven or open our hearts or open our minds. Point number one, bet you it works. That's point number one, bet you it works. I bet you it works. Point number two, it doesn't matter if it works if it's not for a Jew. Remember our rules from this morning? I bet you some forms of idolatry work to calm the mind. They're still not good for us. So our question isn't, does it work? Our question is it for a Jew? And here we have a letter from the Rebbe that is so instructive. I want to read it together, and with that we really will, with God's help, finally conclude. Although honestly, I have another whole thing after this, I think, don't I? Yeah, I have a, that's my last slide. We did it, we made it to the end, let's do it, okay. I thought I had one more, fantastic. The Rebbe writes, regarding the new drug called LSD, which is said to have the property of mental stimulation. Now, for those of you who are good at reading Rebbe letters, or perhaps just insightful when it comes to analyzing texts, perhaps you noticed, I just ruined everything with that opening sentence. This letter's about LSD. I can't apply that to mushrooms or ayahuasca or anything else, right? The Rebbe's talking about LSD exclusively. Don't apply incorrectly. No jumps, yes? Watch the next sentence. Biochemistry is not my field, and I can't express an opinion on the drug you mentioned as it's still new. The Rebbe says, I have nothing to say about LSD because I'm not a biochemist. Once again, I wish more rabbis would talk this way. I don't know what I'm talking about, and therefore I'm not going to say anything. The Rebbe knows what he's talking about and still isn't going to say anything because it's not his field. So, the Rebbe says, biochemistry is not my field. I can't express an opinion. However, what I can say is that the claim that the said drug can stimulate mystical insight is not the proper way to attain mystical inspiration, even if it had such a property. Notice what the Rebbe just did. The Rebbe said, I'm not talking about LSD, I'm talking about any drug purported to give you a mystical insight, which means this letter is not an LSD letter, it's an every hallucinogen letter. By doing this, he broadened the letter. Now we can read it about everything. And if we're reading about everything, we better pay attention. The expert on mystical insight has some mystical insight for us. The claim that this drug can stimulate mystical insight is not the proper way to attain it, even if it could. The Rebbe is saying, even if it works, even if this sets your soul on fire and makes you daven with passion and makes you a better father or a mother, no matter what this thing is doing, not worth it. Not worth it. The Jewish way is to go from strength to strength. We put in the work. We don't pop pills to have our Jewish work done for us. We pop pills if we're sick. When it comes to the work of making ourselves better, we don't take shortcuts. It's not Jewish to take shortcuts, even if they work. Not by means of drugs and other artificial stimulants, which have a place only, look at that, if they're necessary for physical health. Says the Rebbe, tell me a person's sick, give them mushrooms. Tell me a person's sick, give them LSD. Tell me that they're trying to cheat and jump the line when it comes to personal improvement. That's the most non-Jewish thing I've ever heard in my life. We don't jump the line when it comes to our work. We put in the work every single day to become our best selves. Spirituality is not about arriving, it's about the journey. If I have Reuven over here, my fellow, this is my hand puppet Reuven. When Reuven pops a pill, LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, and feels spiritually maximized, his soul is open, his mind is open. He's one with God Almighty. And he goes straight to heaven. And he always feels good about it. And I have Shimon on my other hand. And Shimon, he never takes the pill. He works hard every day to serve God. He studies Torah with faith. He does mitzvahs with meaning. And he tries his best to feel something. And at the end of the day, his heart never opens up. But he spends his entire life working for God's causes. Who did a better job? Shimon obviously did a better job. The goal is not the reward. It's great to feel good. I'm not knocking inspiration. I'm saying the goal of our life here is not inspiration. That's the prize. Inspiration is the prize, not the goal. The goal is the work. The Rebbe is saying here, if you go straight for the inspiration and skip the work, you skip the point of being alive. You know when you were most inspired in your entire life? I'll tell you, before you were born. Before you were born, your soul was one with God Almighty. He sent you into this world to do work, not to feel good. Feeling good's a bonus. Our job here is to work. Take the work out. Why be born? They have a place only if they're necessary for physical health in accordance with the mitzvah to take care of one's health. If it's a drug, take it. If it's for your inspiration, stop. I hope everyone will agree that before any drugs are taken, one should first utilize all of one's natural capacities. Before you cheat, why don't you see what you're capable of? And when this is done truly and fully, I do not think there will be a need to look for artificial stimulants, says the Rebbe. If you really do try, you're going to find that you have something in you 1,000 times more powerful than any hallucinogen and any drug, natural or chemical. The most powerful and potent thing God ever put in the world was the godly soul, a literal piece of God, and everybody in this room has one. Why would anybody turn to a pithy little chemical or to an herb or to a drug for spirituality when they have a literal piece of God inside them already? Work to open up your own heart, put in the time, and the Rebbe says you'll find you don't need it. You can rely on the Rebbe for this, I guarantee you. Open your heart, work hard, pray and do mitzvahs and daven and learn Torah, and you're going to find you don't need this stuff. A Jew has no business in these particular things. Okay, thank you all very much.